It was just another Saturday morning. I had my usual routine, a quiet cup of coffee, and my old F-150 truck in need of a fresh oil change. Nothing out of the ordinary until my hand brushed against something under the truck that I wasn't expecting. I paused, puzzled. Under the dim light of my garage, I found it, a black box attached to the frame with an industrial magnet. A GPS tracker. The worst part? It was still warm. Not from the sun, but from recent use. Someone had been tracking my every move. But who would want to track me? And why? It was a Saturday ritual that had become second nature to me over the years, changing the oil in my truck. I've been doing it for decades. The routine had a comfort to it. Every weekend, the same old task: slide under the truck with the creeper, drain the oil, replace the filter, and top it off. My hands ached with age. My joints creaked louder than they used to, but I took pride in doing it myself. That was the way I'd always done things, and it wasn't going to change. But that morning, something felt different. I slid under the truck like I had 1,000 times before, the engine still warm from the night before. The familiar smell of motor oil filled the air, but there was something else, something off. As I was draining the oil, my hand brushed against something that didn't belong. Cold metal. Smooth. A foreign object wedged underneath the frame. I stopped immediately. My heart skipped a beat. What was this? I reached out again, my fingers trembling slightly. There was a black box about the size of a deck of cards, magnetically attached to the underside of my truck. A tiny red LED blinked at me in the dim light of the garage, giving the thing an almost sinister feel. I pulled myself out from under the truck and grabbed my flashlight. The beam landed on the object and confirmed what I feared: a GPS tracker. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Whoever put this here knew exactly what they were doing. The device wasn't cheap. It wasn't some low-quality gadget from an electronics store. No, this was something professional, industrial grade. This was the kind of device someone would use for serious surveillance. The worst part? The tracker was warm. Not from the sun. It was barely 60 degrees Fahrenheit outside that morning. It was still warm from recent use. Whoever had placed it there had done so recently, and that thought sent a chill down my spine. Someone was watching me. Someone had been tracking my every move. I didn't panic. That wouldn't do any good. I had learned a long time ago that the best way to handle a situation like this was to stay calm. So I pulled my phone out and started snapping pictures. Every angle, every detail, the serial number on the side. I documented everything, just as I had been trained to do when dealing with mechanical failures. I knew this was more than a simple mistake. This was something far bigger. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the tracker wrapped neatly in a Ziploc bag. My coffee had gone cold, but I wasn't thinking about that. The only thing on my mind was the question that was haunting me: who would want to track me? I ran through the list of people who'd been in my garage that past week. It wasn't a long list, just a handful of faces I knew well. Jim, my neighbor, was the first to come to mind. He lived 2 plots down, a good guy, but 75, he could barely remember how to use his flip phone, let alone install something as complicated as a GPS tracker. No way Jim did this. I crossed him off the list almost immediately. Then there was the propane delivery guy. He'd fill my tank on Monday. I didn't know him well, just a quick in-and-out job. He didn't seem the type to have any personal interest in me. No, he was a stranger who had no reason to track some random customer. I dismissed him as well. Finally, there was Dylan, my son. He'd stopped by Tuesday afternoon to check on the horses. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now I couldn't help but replay the scene in my head. Dylan had spent about 15 minutes in the garage, supposedly checking the tire pressure on my truck. It didn't add up. He never cared much about the horses, and checking tire pressure on a truck doesn't take that long. He had seemed so concerned. Too concerned, I thought. What was he really doing in my garage? I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my temples. The tracker had been professionally installed. The heat from the device meant it had been active, and someone had been tracking my every movement. That wasn't a guess. It was a fact. Whoever did this knew how to install high-tech equipment, and they had the means and motive to keep tabs on me. I couldn't help but wonder if it was Dylan. He knew trucks. He was the only one who could have done this. And then there was the fact that he'd been spending more time with me lately, more than usual. It all started to feel like a pattern. But no, I couldn't jump to conclusions without knowing more. As much as it pained me to think it, I didn't want to believe my own son could be involved in something like this. That was a bridge I wasn't ready to cross yet. So I decided to take a step back. I wouldn't confront Dylan just yet. I needed to test my theory first. I had learned one thing in my years as an engineer: never act on assumptions. You had to observe, gather data, and see what happens when pressure is applied. I carefully placed the tracker back into its bag, my mind working overtime. I didn't want to make a rash move. I had 3 people who had access to my garage. One of them was my son, and he was the most likely suspect. But I wouldn't call him yet. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I would wait. Wait to see if anyone would notice that my truck was parked in the garage, unmoved for days. I keep my eyes open and wait for someone to slip. I decided to take action, but not the kind you might expect. I wasn't going to confront Dylan just yet. I needed to gather more information. I had to test my hypothesis. After all, I'd spent my whole life solving problems, and this one wasn't any different. I needed to see how this played out before making a decision I couldn't take back. So I stayed home. I didn't go anywhere. The F-150 remained parked in the garage, untouched, its engine cold. It felt strange, almost unnatural. I wasn't used to sitting still like this. I was used to going out, running errands, checking on the farm, doing the usual chores. But today I was going to observe, watch, see who came around asking questions. I went about my day, as usual, but my mind kept drifting back to the tracker. It sat in a Ziploc bag in my desk drawer, a silent reminder that someone was out there, watching me. It wasn't paranoia. It was a fact, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone wanted to know where I was at all times. But who? And why? Sunday came and went. The day was quiet. I fed the horses, mended the fence, and cleaned out the barn. The truck remained parked. The tracker remained in the drawer. No calls. No texts. Dylan didn't check in. I felt like I was waiting for something, waiting for the moment when the other shoe would drop. But it didn't come. Then, Monday afternoon, my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. Dylan. I let it ring, letting it go to voicemail. It wasn't the right time. If he was tracking my every move, I wanted him to wonder where I was. I didn't need to answer. I stayed put. 30 minutes later, Dylan called again. This time, I picked up. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice trying a little too hard to sound casual. "Just checking in." "Everything's fine," I said, keeping my tone even. "What's up?" "Just making sure your truck's running okay," he said quickly. The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask about the truck?" I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. "Oh, no reason," he replied quickly. "Just, wondering if you needed anything. Maybe I'll come by later, check on the horses." It was too perfect. His timing. The way he slipped that question about the truck in there, so casually. His tone shifted, too. It was like he was holding something back. I could feel it in my gut. "Well, everything's good here," I said, trying to keep things light. "The truck's still in the garage. Just taking care of a few things. No need to come by." "Yeah, of course," Dylan said. "Just checking. I'll talk to you later, okay?" "Sure, talk to you later." I hung up the phone, staring at it for a long moment. My instincts had been right. Dylan was watching. He was worried, and he wasn't acting like himself. I sat down at my kitchen table, turning the situation over in my head. I couldn't let this go on any longer. He was the only person who could have installed the tracker, and I had to know for sure. I couldn't let myself be blindsided again. I had to keep going with my plan, even if it meant pushing the limits. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. Instead, I watched, waited, and observed. And the next day, Tuesday, was when everything started to change. Tuesday came, and I spent most of the day on the porch doing little things around the house, trying to keep myself busy. The truck stayed parked. No one came by. Dylan didn't call. But something about the silence made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Around noon, I decided to finally check my computer. I hadn't really used it much since Dylan helped me set it up 6 months ago. But today I had a nagging feeling. I opened the laptop and went through the usual routine, checking my emails, paying bills, the stuff I'd done 1,000 times. But something caught my eye, an unfamiliar program running in the background. I opened the task manager to take a look. There was a program called Remote Access Service.exe. The name alone made my heart drop. I didn't recognize it. It didn't look like any software I'd ever installed, and certainly not something I'd authorized. I clicked to see more details and froze. It was software designed to remotely access and control my computer. My gut twisted. Dylan, had he been watching me through my own computer? Had he been using this program to monitor what I was doing? I checked the installation date. It had been installed exactly 6 months ago, the day he'd helped me set up my Wi-Fi. I felt a cold sweat run down my spine. All of this, everything, was starting to make sense. It wasn't just about the truck. It wasn't just the tracker. Dylan had been tracking my every move, not just on the road, but in my personal life too. I opened the file access logs, bank statements, legal documents, personal emails. Everything had been accessed remotely, without my knowledge. Whoever was behind this had access to my most private information, my finances, my passwords, my personal life. I had no idea how deep this went, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just being watched. I was being controlled. But there was something even worse. I dug deeper into the system and found a log for a document that hadn't been opened by me. A loan application. I clicked on it, and my stomach dropped to my knees. The loan amount was staggering, $340,000. It was signed under my name, but the signature looked off. Not right. It was too clean, too perfect. It wasn't mine. The loan was linked to my ranch, my home. I sat back, my mind racing. Dylan had forged my signature, taken out a massive loan in my name, and used my property as collateral. He'd been planning this for a while, and I had no idea. But that wasn't the worst part. I searched the loan company's name, Apex Investment Solutions. The name was unfamiliar, but my blood ran cold when I found out what they were really about. It wasn't just a loan company. It was a front for a loan shark operation. High interest, violent collection methods. People didn't just pay these kinds of loans back. No, they disappeared. If Dylan couldn't pay, they'd come for me. And if I refused to cooperate, they would come for me too. I suddenly felt a weight settle in my chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something darker. My son had put me in danger. Not just financially, but physically. I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't sure I could control. My son had been involved in something I never could have imagined. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, letting everything sink in. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I had to find a way to stop this before it went any further. But I wasn't going to do it alone. I needed help. I needed someone I could trust. And I knew exactly who to call. I wasn't sure how much time I had left, but I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't risk confronting Dylan just yet. He was too clever, too involved in this mess. If I made a move too soon, I could tip him off, and everything I had worked for could come crumbling down. No, I needed to be smart. I needed to get the tracker out of the country. I needed to create some distance, make it harder for anyone to trace it back to me. I reached out to an old friend, someone I knew I could trust. Ray Fletcher, a long-haul trucker. Ray and I had been friends for years. He never asked questions and always had my back. If anyone could get this tracker far away from me, it was him. I called him up that evening, my voice low, my words measured. Ray, I need a favor. A small package. Can you get it to Winnipeg for me? He was quiet for a moment. What's in it? Nothing dangerous. Nothing illegal. But I need you to get it there without questions, I said, trying to keep the details vague. He chuckled, low and knowing. You're a weird old man, Frank. But I'll do it. Just meet me tomorrow, and don't worry about anything. The next morning, I drove to the I-90 truck stop just outside Bozeman, where Ray always parked when he was passing through. The fog clung to the asphalt, making everything look muffled, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Ray's rig was there, idling like some great metal beast, its engine rumbling in the cold morning air. I stepped out of my truck and walked over to him. He was leaning against the side of his rig, wearing his usual worn leather jacket, looking like he'd been on the road for days. When he saw me, he waved me over. You got it? He asked. I nodded, pulling out a small box wrapped in bubble wrap and sealing tape. It wasn't much, but the contents inside were dangerous. Dangerous enough that they couldn't stay here. Don't open it, I said as I handed it over. Just get across the border. No return address, no labels. Ray raised an eyebrow. You really trust me that much, huh? Yeah, E-daw. Just get it there, I replied. Ray didn't need much more convincing. He took the box, nodded, and tucked it behind the seat in his truck. "I'll text you when I cross the border," he said. "Thanks, Ray. I owe you one." His truck rumbled to life, and the red tail lights disappeared into the fog. I watched until I couldn't see them anymore. My stomach was in knots, but I couldn't show it. I couldn't let anyone see my fear. I turned and walked back to my truck, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. Now, all I could do was wait. I spent the rest of the day pacing around the house, keeping busy with small tasks, but my mind was racing. The tracker was on its way to Canada. I had done everything I could to get out of reach, but the fear gnawed at me. What if Dylan found out before I had the chance to confront him? What if this whole plan backfired, and the people who were behind this came after me anyway? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The quiet was deafening. The whole ranch felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode, and I was standing at the edge of it. By late afternoon, I received a text from Ray. "Crossed the border. Package delivered. Everything's fine." I exhaled, the weight lifting slightly off my shoulders. But there was still the matter of Dylan. I had to confront him soon. There was no turning back now. As evening fell, I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then, just as I thought I could relax for a minute, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Dylan. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't answer. I let it ring through to voicemail. But it didn't stop there. Dylan called again. And again. I felt my pulse quicken. What was he trying to do? Why the sudden urgency? The phone rang for the fourth time. I had no choice but to pick it up. "Hey, Dad." Dylan's voice sounded strained. "I've been trying to get a hold of you." "Where are you?" I paused for a moment, weighing my words. "I'm home, Dylan. Where else would I be?" There was a noticeable hesitation on his end. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke again. "You sure? You haven't gone anywhere? You're at the ranch." It was as though his words were laced with panic, desperation just under the surface. I felt a tightness in my chest, my gut churning with unease. This wasn't just about the truck anymore. It was something else. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I told you, Dylan. I'm at home. Haven't left the property." A pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "You're sure, Dad? I just want to make sure you're okay. You're not driving anywhere, right?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd already told him the truck was in the garage, not going anywhere. So why was he so insistent? The panic in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't concerned about me. He was concerned about the truck. The tracker. I could feel the pieces falling into place. Dylan knew the tracker had been removed. He knew it was gone. And that's why he was calling. To check if I had noticed. To check if I had made a move. I could hear the fear in his voice, and it was real. He wasn't just playing it cool anymore. He was scared. "Why are you asking about the truck, Dylan?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why are you so worried about it?" There was a long silence. Then Dylan stammered, I just want to make sure you're safe. You know, with your age and everything. Car trouble can be dangerous." His voice was shaky, but the excuse didn't hold up. It didn't make sense. I held my ground. "I'm siedemdziesiąt, Dylan. Not dead. I'm fine." I ended the call, but the knot in my stomach remained. Dylan had just confirmed it for me. He was watching me, and he was scared. He knew I was onto him. As I sat there, my mind racing, I realized the next step was inevitable. It was time to confront him, but I couldn't do it without knowing the full truth. I couldn't trust him anymore, not after everything that had happened. I had to get more proof, and I couldn't let him know what I knew. But the worst part was yet to come. I knew Dylan, and I knew he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. What if he was already too far in? What if he was willing to do anything to get the ranch? I couldn't sleep that night. The phone calls kept ringing in my head. The panic in Dylan's voice. The desperation. I knew the situation was getting worse, and there was no way out but to face it head on. I couldn't keep running from the truth anymore. The more I waited, the more dangerous this situation became. I had to face Dylan and had to get the answers I needed. I had to know what kind of person he'd become. The son I raised, or the man who was willing to betray me, his own flesh and blood. I called him the next morning. "Dylan," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I need to talk to you. I know what you've been doing." There was a pause, and I could almost hear his breath catch. He wasn't ready for this. Not yet, but I was ready to face whatever came next. "You're not coming by here. I continued. I'm coming to you. Now. I hung up before he could protest. I didn't waste time. I grabbed the small bag containing the tracker and the evidence I had collected, photos, screenshots, the forged loan papers, everything. This was bigger than just a tracker under my truck. This was about trust, about betrayal, about a son willing to destroy everything for money, for control. I couldn't let it go any longer. I had to confront him. When I arrived at Dylan's house, he was already standing outside, looking like he'd been expecting me. His face was pale, and there was a nervous energy about him that I hadn't seen in years. It was almost like I was facing a stranger. "Come inside," he said, but his voice trembled slightly. I could tell he wasn't sure what to expect. Neither was I. We sat down in the living room. His girlfriend, Brittany, was there too, sitting in the corner, watching us with a strange mix of guilt and defiance in her eyes. I didn't care about her at that moment. This was about Dylan. "I know what you did," I said, laying the bag with the tracker and documents on the coffee table between us. "I found this under my truck. I know about the loan you took out in my name. I know you've been tracking me, watching my every move." Dylan's face was drained of color. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. I didn't give him a chance to recover. "And I know about the kill switch," I continued. "You installed a tracker and a device that could kill me at any moment. You could have shut my engine off, locked the brakes. I would have been dead on the road." Dylan's hands trembled as he reached for the table, trying to steady himself. "Dad, please," he said, his voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Brittany stood up suddenly, anger flashing in her eyes. "No, Dylan, don't say anything," she snapped. "You didn't." I cut her off. "Shut up, Brittany. This isn't your mess to clean up." I turned back to Dylan. "You put my life in danger. You put everything I've worked for at risk. You betrayed me, your own father, for money, for control." His shoulders slumped. He was shaking now, tears in his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you, Dad," he said, barely above a whisper. "We were in so much debt. Brittany and me. We were desperate. The loan sharks, I don't care." I shouted, my voice rising. "You don't do this to your family. You don't put your father's life on the line just because you're too afraid to ask for help." Dylan collapsed forward, his face in his hands. "I didn't know how to fix it," he sobbed. "I didn't know how to fix anything." Brittany, her eyes wide, stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "It was my idea, Frank. I made him do it. I pushed him into it. We didn't know where else to turn. We thought we could pay it back. We were going to fix it. I cut her off again. "You think that makes it any better? You both knew exactly what you were doing. This wasn't some accident. This was calculated. You put my name on a loan. You forged my signature. You had access to everything. You made me a pawn in your game." The room went quiet. The only sound was the soft sobs coming from Dylan. The weight of the situation was settling in, and I realized that I wasn't just confronting a son who made a terrible mistake. I was facing a man who had made a choice that had put both our lives in jeopardy. I looked at Brittany, her face pale. "You're just as guilty as he is," I said, my voice low and steady. "You helped him. You knew what he was doing." She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I reached for my phone and dialed the police. "Yes, I need to report a case of fraud, identity theft, and attempted murder," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and sadness. "I need to report my son." The call to the police felt surreal, but it was the right thing to do. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Would Dylan be arrested? Would he face the consequences of his actions? It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had to put an end to this. I couldn't let this situation fester any longer. It wasn't just about the tracker or the loan or the betrayal. It was about taking control of my own life again. By the time the police arrived, Dylan and Brittany were both in a daze. Brittany was pacing, glancing nervously at the door every few seconds, while Dylan sat on the couch, his face buried in his hands. The guilt was written all over him. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it didn't change what he'd done. The officers arrived around 20 minutes later, two of them, young and efficient. They didn't waste time, immediately beginning their questioning. They took down everything, my statement about the tracker, the spyware, the forged loan, and the kill switch. I had all the evidence they needed. Photos, screenshots, the tracking device, the forged documents, and even the text from Ray confirming the tracker had been sent to Canada. It was clear this was no small operation. It was an elaborate scheme, and I wasn't going to let my son get away with it. As the officers took their notes and asked further questions, I stayed back, watching the scene unfold. Dylan was handcuffed and led out of the house without resistance. Brittany, on the other hand, continued to protest, claiming she had been coerced into everything. But the evidence was too strong and the truth too undeniable. When they left, I stood in the living room, feeling the silence crash over me. The weight of everything that had happened hung in the air, suffocating. Dylan had been arrested, but what did that really mean for me? For him? For us? The police assured me that the investigation would continue and that they would look into the loan sharks and the larger operation behind it all. But as I stood there, watching the cruiser pull away with my son in the back seat, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that I had failed somewhere along the way as a father. I had raised a son who was capable of such deception, of such a cold, calculated plan. The following days were a blur. The legal process was slow but steady. Dylan was charged with wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and attempted murder. He was facing a serious time. Brittany was charged too, but not as heavily. The whole thing felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept telling myself that this was the right thing, that I had done what needed to be done, but the emptiness never went away. The ranch was safe now. The loan sharks were under investigation, and the FBI had already made arrests. The fraud scheme was much larger than I had initially thought, but all of that felt secondary to what had happened in my own family, to what Dylan had done. The emotional toll was harder than I expected. I had done everything to protect myself, to protect the ranch, but in doing so, I had lost the connection with my son that I had cherished for so long. The guilt gnawed at me. Was I wrong to turn him in? Could I have done something differently? The following weeks were a blur. Dylan went through the legal process, and Brittany fought her charges. Dylan, at least, had some semblance of a defense. He was overwhelmed by his debts, by his gambling addiction, by his failed attempts at making things right. But none of that changed the fact that he had crossed a line. He had endangered me, his own father, and there was no going back from that. Brittany's trial was much less drawn out. She tried to claim innocence, that she had been manipulated, but the jury wasn't buying it. She was convicted of conspiracy and identity theft and sentenced to 5 years in prison, along with a $100,000 fine. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had been complicit, just as guilty as Dylan, and now she would pay for it. As for Dylan, the outcome was far worse. He pled guilty to all charges, and the judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison, with 3 years of supervised release afterward. It was the only justice I could get, but it didn't feel like justice at all. It felt like the end of something I didn't know how to fix. 6 months later, I sat on my porch, a coffee in my hand, watching the world go by. Scout, the border collie I'd adopted shortly after the whole ordeal, lay at my feet, lazily chewing on a stick. Life had found its rhythm again, though it would never be the same. Dylan had written me letters, 4 of them, each one harder to read than the last. I hadn't opened the first 3, but the 4th one was different. It was full of regret, of apology, and of the understanding that he had failed, not just me, but himself. The words were hard to read, and even harder to accept, but I didn't turn my back on him entirely. I couldn't. He was still my son, and despite everything, I still loved him. But forgiveness? That was something I couldn't give him just yet. Maybe someday, but not today. The ranch was mine, safe in an irrevocable trust, untouched by the loan sharks or their threats. The nightmares had mostly stopped, and I'd even started speaking at senior centers about elder abuse. I'd found a way to be useful again, instead of just a victim. It felt good to help others see the warning signs before it was too late. I glanced at the phone as it rang, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before picking it up. "Hello, Mr. Morrison?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "Yes. My name is William Hayes. I'm calling because I found something under my car, a GPS tracker, and there's something off with my finances too. I think I'm in trouble." I didn't hesitate. "William, don't panic. Document everything. Get a lawyer. Check your computer for spyware. Don't confront anyone yet. I know exactly what you're going through. And as I said those words, I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a warning, and I was here to help others avoid the same fate. If this story resonated with you, if you found yourself wondering what you would have done in my place, hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Trust can be fragile, and sometimes you have to protect yourself, even if it means going against family. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done? How would you handle a betrayal like this? If you're new to the channel, subscribe and stay tuned for more gripping, real-life stories that matter. Your support means the world. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourself out there.